Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muscle for Life. I'm Mike Matthews, and thank you for joining me today. And hey, if you like what I'm doing here on the podcast, take a moment to subscribe to it in whatever app you are listening in for two reasons. One, it'll make sure you don't miss new episodes because then the new episodes will automatically download and be queued up, and you may get a notification as well, depending on the app that you are using. And two, it's going to help me because it helps boost the rankings of the show on the various charts. And that, of course, helps other people find my podcast. And hopefully they like it as much as you do. All right, so in this episode, I interview Austin Current about a new book that he just released that I am impressed with, I highly recommend, called The Science of Strength Training. And it is a visual encyclopedia and comprehensive resource on all of the important details and aspects of strength training. It goes over physiology, it goes over anatomy, it goes over how muscles work, how you should choose exercises, how you can build different types of workout programs, and much more. Again, I'm impressed. A lot of work went into this book, and there are a lot of visuals, which really helps when you are getting into the nitty-gritty details, because without those visuals, you can get pretty confused pretty quickly because you're trying to visualize these things in your mind's eye. And if you're really good at it, then you may get it right, but you may not. And you may wonder if you're getting it right. Are you seeing this correctly? Are you understanding these words correctly? Are you translating that description of how a muscle cell works correctly in your mind? It helps a lot to have accurate images. And again, this book is full of great visuals and full of great information. So if you are a regular here on the podcast, I promise you, you are not going to be disappointed by this book. And that's why I wanted to get the author of the book, Austin, on the show to talk about not the book, but to talk about what's in the book, to share helpful information like how do muscles work? What are the mechanics? What is muscle damage? And how does that relate to muscle growth? Does it directly contribute to it, or is it more just a side effect of mechanical tension, which we know, of course, contributes to muscle growth, or is something else the case? We also talk about another factor related to muscle building, which is metabolic fatigue, and Austin explains whether it directly contributes to muscle building or, again, is just more of a side effect of proper hypertrophy training. And we get into other little tangents about the theory and practice of getting bigger and stronger. And in case you're not familiar with Austin, he is an educator, obviously. He's an author, but he's also a coach, and he is the co-founder of Physique Development, a group of coaches that works with everyday fitness folks and competitors alike. And he himself has had a successful career as a natural physique bodybuilder. And he also is very good at breaking down complex topics, making them easy to understand and actionable. And that is a skill that I appreciate because it is something that I am always trying to get better at myself. That is my primary goal in all of the stuff that I produce, all of the educational material that I produce. I want anybody to be able to read it or listen to it, understand it, and use it and get results. Also, if you like what I am doing here on the podcast and elsewhere, definitely check out my sports nutrition company, Legion, which, thanks to the support of many people like you, is the leading brand of all natural sports supplements in the world. And we're on top because every ingredient and dose in every product is backed by peer-reviewed scientific research. Every formulation is 100% transparent. There are no proprietary blends, for example. And everything is naturally sweetened and flavored. So that means no artificial sweeteners, no artificial food dyes, which may not be as dangerous as some people would have you believe, but there is good evidence to suggest that having many servings of artificial sweeteners in particular every day for long periods of time may not be the best for your health. So while you don't need pills, powders, and potions to get into great shape, and frankly, most of them are virtually useless, there are natural ingredients that can help you lose fat, build muscle, and get healthy faster, and you will find the best of them in Legion's products. To check out everything we have to offer, including protein powders and bars, pre-workout and post-workout supplements, fat burners, multivitamins, joint support, and more, head over to buylegion.com/Mike. That's BUYLEGION.com/Mike. And just to show you how much I appreciate my podcast peeps, use the coupon code MFL at checkout and you will save 20% on your entire first order. Hey, Austin, thanks for making the time to come teach me about getting jacked, the art and science.
Absolutely my pleasure, man. Yeah, I think it's gonna be a great one.
This is like maybe my 5th video interview too. I like this. I was doing just audio for a while, and I've posted audio tracks to YouTube for a while, which of course is not how you do YouTube. That's actually the worst way to do YouTube. So much so that most people would say don't even bother. Like, you're actually probably just you're tainting your account to where if you ever get around to doing YouTube correctly, all of the metrics are going to look so bad that YouTube will never give you a single eyeball. But ironically, just posting audio, my account has continued to grow on YouTube. So I guess I'm doing something right. But I figured, I'm doing these interviews. I should make them YouTube friendly and get on camera, right?
I think so. You're an internet guy too. I think you should play by the rules. And I don't think anyone knows really what the rules are. And I think we're all just kind of stabbing at it. But I would say that YouTube being a visual platform, let's go
probably should have some visual stimulation. Probably. Yeah. I actually do want to get around to doing YouTube better, correctly. And that'll probably be later in the year because it's going to require I'm going to need a good videographer, I guess would be the term, and I'm going to need a good editor. Maybe it's the same person, maybe not. Those are different skills entirely. But I would like to, because I produce a lot of educational material, and it wouldn't be that much more work for me to repurpose that into YouTube-friendly presentations with good editing and me on camera explaining things. And, I don't spend much time on YouTube, and I generally don't like social media, but if I can use it, like I couldn't motivate myself to want to vlog, for example. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. I'm not a vlogger.
It's not me. And also if I'm going to honestly vlog, it's not going to be very exciting. It's going to be the same exact thing every day. And it's going to be me sitting in my infrared sauna reading, me working out, me working at my computer all day, me eating food, me taking bathroom breaks, me taking water breaks, me reading, and me going to bed. And then maybe some stuff that I couldn't show with my wife, and maybe a little bit of time with my kids. And that's it. Like, rinse and repeat. It's not a very exciting vlog,
Right. Well, dude, I remember one of my favorite vlog series was actually Mike Vacanti's a few years back. He did in like 2017 or so. Again, like Vacanti's a super regimented guy, right? You know, Mike, and super regimented guy. And honestly, man, I enjoyed that part of it. Cause it's like, I don't know, man. I enjoyed that part of that.
Well, probably resonated because you're probably similar. So
I'm like, similar. I see my life as like yourself, just super, just regimented, boring. And, it's funny, man. We all kind of like when you first start, you kind of try to take on personas, right? And you're trying to fake it till you make it early on before you realize that that's not quite the best way to do it. When there's other options available, right? So if you have the lever to pull that is, intellectual property or understanding things a little bit better than others, that way you can explain it back to them in a way that helps you understand it, right? Which is a lot of education. I didn't know that was a lever to pull at the time, and I didn't necessarily have that intellectual property yet. So I was trying to kind of like fake it till I made it. So I kind of like purposely left up some old YouTube videos, and they are horrendous to go back and watch. Cause like, it's like that terrible YouTube voice, you're trying to like have
what's up, YouTube?
You're trying to have a personality. And it's like, now if you watch my Instagram story, I'm as enthusiastic as I am right now. And, it's just kind of like, all right, there's a podcast. go listen.
Yeah.
That's all you're going to get from me. But if usually, honestly, man, if you see my story or meet me in real life, there's not much discrepancy past like, oh, you're actually like this. It's like, yeah, I'm actually like this. Yeah.
Yeah. I get the same. Ironically, I don't get many people, coming up to me. I'm not a celebrity.
Oh shit, man. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not going to say that, but
I don't, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen here and there. Ironically, it happened today, and people are usually pleased to see that I'm the same person in person as I am in my podcast, or just my persona, quote unquote. The only things that I hold back are I have a bit of a wacky, kind of twisted internet sense of humor, and so there are some off-color jokes that I might make with my friends that I'm just not going to make publicly, because some people will take it the wrong way. And so I do hold some of that back, although not all of it. I just do it with tact. Whereas again, if I'm hanging out with my brother-in-law, who was my best friend before my brother-in-law, I've known him since I was 16. It's going to be different. There are things that, he understands, certain types of interactions and jokes and things that if somebody were to just meet me, they'd be like, wait, what did he just say?
There's an understanding of there's a sort of like an understood preface to the conversation, right? And I think that's missed in mass media. And honestly, man, I think that's something that, I enjoy to keep separate. I think there's a place where not everything should be on the internet. Not everything should be on social media. And there's so many intimate parts of yourself and your personality that should only be experienced sort of in real life. Right. Yep. That
it may take context, and it may take time. Like even, a rule that I try to live by is to try to treat people the way that they would like to be treated, and to try not to do things that they can't comfortably experience. Now that sometimes it's appropriate actually to transgress against that rule, but I think more often than not, that's a good way to behave, and it makes people feel better for having interacted with you rather than worse. And so to that point, there certainly are things that if I were to just make an offhand remark that I may make to somebody who knows me well, that may not create a good reaction in somebody who doesn't know me well. And so I'll save it. I'll save that stuff again for the people who can experience it comfortably. You know what I mean? And I know I'm making this sound mysterious and extreme. Not at all. But in today's environment, particularly, I mean, there are some people who are very sensitive about a lot of things, and I'm not a sensitive person. And I really do think I can say I'm not a hypocrite. Like, I am not easily offended. And so I may say some offensive things sometimes, but I can take it too. Like, people can come to me and they could really say, hey, Mike, I think you're an idiot, and let me explain why. And my instinctive response would not be to jump to my own defense. Actually, it'd be like, really? I'd be intrigued. I'd be like, I gotta hear
tell
this.
Me what
I gotta hear this. This sounds interesting, right? Yeah. So I do try to keep, I think that it's important, if you're going to give it, you got to be able to take it as well. The hypocrites those are the worst.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of like expand on that, it's especially on social media, like, be the reason that someone has a better day than they were having before, right? Like, there's just no reason, with how much is, us all drinking from a fire hose every day. I don't want to be that water droplet that was the catalyst to you having a worse off day. Because I don't need to be that in your life. Like, I'm not here to do that. That's not my goal in real life, but especially not on social media, especially when it's like, I just want to teach you about some stuff you may be confused on. That's about where I'm going to leave it on social media. Like, I'm a pretty private guy.
I don't personally like social media. I don't use it outside of my work functions, which is, again, sharing educational, sometimes would be inspirational, maybe trying to be inspirational stuff, at least the stuff that is interesting to me, at least. And then answering DMs and answering people's questions. And I think that is not maybe the best way to build a big following. There are certainly, because if you're going to just go after getting followers, then you want to do things that are extreme, that are different, that are contrarian. You want to stir the pot because that creates emotional responses in people, and then that leads to more sharing, and that leads to that's that game. So the game I'm playing isn't as good for exponentially growing my following, but I would say, one, it's more in line with my ideals and my values. And two, at least I am attracting people for the right reasons. Then I'm attracting people who do appreciate the learning, and they are there to get motivated to train harder and better and learn how to train harder and better. And so I'd say that I'd rather have a smaller number of those people than a larger number of people who could care less really about that stuff and are just there with the popcorn, waiting for the fireworks.
Yeah. The armchair quarterbacks. Yeah. It's interesting to me, right? I'd love to hear your thought on this really quick, but I would almost argue, because I have the same approach, just in general. And I would go to argue that if you have products to sell, or you have a message to sort of get out there, or education to be sort of told, I would argue that that's a better game plan going into your season, right? Your season on social media, because the type of people you're going to attract in that, those individuals have adjacent qualities that are going to really help your message get out there more, right? Because they're going to be a better conversationalist and asking better questions most on average. They're going to be less probably sensitive to just calling you out on, like, hey, why is that stupid keyboard in your background? Like, I hate keyboards. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? What kind of comment is that? Like, I'm talking about muscles. Like, there's those people on YouTube and social media, right? And those are going to be the people that, like you were saying, and I share that, those people are going to be the ones, I think, who are going to give you a better quality word of mouth, which, as a business owner and one of a very, very successful businesses, I think you understand that aspect of word of mouth and how important that is, right? So how many would you rather have, the first camp, which I'd say you and I are both in, which you explained, talking about your Legion supplements, or would you rather have the second crowd talk about Legion, right? And it's definitely the first one. It may be less of them, but let's say 100,000 people talk to their 4 or 5 closest friends about it in a high quality manner versus, 500,000 people who talk about it negatively or don't talk about it at all because it's their kept secret on the internet. And that's how they view life, as like this scarcity. I have it, you can't have it sort of mindset, right? And so I'd be interested, sort of like, where is the value, right? Because sometimes things sort of work against our initial intuition of like, it should work this way. But actually, if you really think about the underlying mechanisms of how that would spread positively, it could actually benefit us to be the first one a little bit, right? And I may be wrong on that. That's just kind of how I think about it. I just think that accelerates maybe slower over time in a more linear way. But I think the growth over time, if you looked at it on a graph of like positive impact plus growth, I think that's a way better way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. If we're talking about extremes, like kind of just looking at it in binary terms. But to your last point there, I do think that the best approach is probably a bit of both. And I would say instead of just kind of grossly playing to the gallery, incorporating some entertainment value, incorporating some humor. Like I try to do that in my captions and show a bit of my personality. And sometimes it hits the mark, sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it's a dad joke, but it's fine.
Whatever. I try though. I try. But I would say more often than not, it adds to the appeal than it detracts from it. And so if I were to put more time into social media, it would be doing more of that kind of stuff. It'd be figuring out how to take the educational core here, and then kind of envelope it in a nice, tasty, funny or entertaining presentation. And that would do even better. And again, I've seen it. I've done it enough now over the years. So, some of those, because I also use them as emails in other communications, even podcasts sometimes. So I get a fair amount of feedback on things, and when it strikes a chord, it does really well. I mean, I'll get a lot of replies to the emails, people saying how they love them and they send them around. You're not going to get that from just sharing boring, bland, vanilla, hey, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. I mean, well, you're not going to get as much of that. Like if you have good, clear information, and that's something I've tried to produce, that's really my focus, is just to try to make things as simple to understand and as practical as possible. I'm not trying to write to above my head. I'm not trying to appeal just to like scientists and the intelligentsia of the space. Not at all. I'm doing the opposite. And so that appeals to a lot of people, because often experts, people who do actually know things and can help you, they have a hard time communicating in a way that everyday laymen can understand. I mean, they have a hard time just explaining mechanics in simple terms. Like, okay, you have to explain how this stuff works, but you can't rely on jargon. Let's just start there. And any kind of terms of art, any technical terms, you have to define. Like you would have to actually, if you have to use a technical term, or you think it just adds a little bit of flavor, then you do have to define it. You have to tell people what it is. You can't think that they're going to go off and Google and read a Wikipedia article to understand even something like what I want to talk to you today about, mechanical tension. Like you can't just throw that out there and assume that people know what that is. And so yeah, I think that, again, sharing good, clear, practical information that people can immediately put to use and get results with, that's the core of the value of, I think, both of our personal brands. That certainly has been mine since the beginning. And more recently, I've done a little bit of it in the past, but more recently, it has become clear to me that if I can inject more personality and humor in particular, humor writing is tough. It's something that doesn't come easily to me. Like I do have to kind of get into a certain mind space and look at different swipe, and it doesn't just flow because it's new to me. But if I could get good at that, at least let's say approximately as good, and I think I'm pretty good. I don't think I'm great, honestly. By my standards, I'm pretty good at explaining how-to stuff. If I could get pretty good at humor, that would take, I think, my personal brand to the next level. Because we all just love, if something makes us laugh, we are much more likely to share it. We just are.
Yeah. And that's something like Neil deGrasse Tyson, I've heard him say many times, is people learn better when they're laughing or smiling. Right. And I take that home, and he's someone I really respect. You're someone I really respect. You do a great job, man, at making things simple. I think there's a reason your books sell so well and are shared so vastly across the world. It's that people can finally understand it for the way that it was meant to be understood by the 99% of people, which is, when we talk about more about the book and muscle growth and stuff, that was really my mission, is like the 1% is pretty much taken care of here. I'm not necessarily talking to them. I'd like them to be interested.
Let's segue right into that. So, into what we actually want to talk about in today's discussion. It was a good preamble, a good warm up.
Yeah. Sure.
But yeah, if you want to mention quickly, so your book, the title, and then let's talk about muscle growth. Let's talk about the mechanics of muscle growth, the pathways, if you will, and if you want to break down what they are and kind of what the latest, I would say, maybe weight of the evidence is on how important each of these are, and then I'll probably follow up with some questions in terms of maybe what does this mean in programming and so forth.
Absolutely. So the book, I did actually have it prepared. So Science of Strength Training.
Nice.
What is the subtitle? Understand the anatomy of physiology to transform your body. So
it looks great. It's a high quality presentation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was really such an opportunity to do it. And the illustrators were so talented to work with, or so talented in general, so great to work with.
Yeah.
And this book was one of those books where obviously all of this is in my head and it sort of needed to get out. But this book never would have existed without the publisher and their resources. It's one of those books where it's like, if I had to self-publish this never would have happened. So,
a lot of work went into it. That was very clear when I looked at it. And
a lot of work.
That goes without saying if you're going to write a halfway decent book, but then some books take longer than others. There's some books require more man hours than others.
Yeah. And this one, honestly, most of the man hours went into like chapter 2, where you have over 100 exercises sort of laid out, their anatomy used, cues, technique, execution cues and stuff like that are all written out for you. And then stage by stage, how to perform it and all that stuff like that section, that chapter 2 took the longest by far. Just the back and forth with everybody involved, a 10-person team, spanned across the world during a pandemic. It was like, I guess we'll see if this happens. So to transition,
I understand firsthand. I just wrapped up. I'm at the end of this Muscle for Life book I'm doing with Simon & Schuster, 40 plus men and women, very newbie friendly. And the chapter that has all the exercises and has instructions, I was surprised. And it's not as in detail as yours. And that was by design, not that I knew about your book, but again, this book is specifically going to be for people so it has a beginner, intermediate, and advanced program. So the beginner program is really for take a 55 or 65-year-old man or woman who has never done any of this stuff before. Maybe they've done a little bit of exercise of some kind in the past. They're not doing anything right now. And let's say they are very overweight, maybe not hugely obese, but they're overweight. They need to lose a lot of fat. And it wouldn't really be appropriate for me to take that guy, for example, and just put him on Bigger, Leaner, Stronger. He could learn a lot from that book, but would I really, if I were coaching him one-on-one, would I really tell him all right, we're going to start squatting and deadlifting heavy weight? No, I wouldn't. We would work up to that, right? So this book, it can bridge that gap for these people by giving them, again, the beginner program. It would be challenging for that person, but actually doable, not inappropriately difficult. And then work them up to something that is kind of like a light version of what's in my flagship books. And so anyway, the chapter with all the exercise instructions, it took a lot of drafts, and I kept on finding things. It's how am I still finding things how did I not catch this? You know what I mean?
It's the smallest things that get thrown off that you're like, please use this word. And so my publisher is based in London. And so even the British English to American English is vastly different. Right. And so there were little nuances within language where it was when we were talking about an exercise, they, sometimes they would put a word in that was and hold your pros and hold your, and it's one, I would never speak like that. And two, that word doesn't make sense. It may technically be the right literary word for this.
But if it's British slang or a British saying, there are so many of them that we don't say. Nobody says.
I've never said that in my life.
Yeah, even the literati, trying to flex in the Atlantic won't use it because nobody will know. And then you go to the dictionary and you're like, oh, that's lame. It's some British thing that nobody says. Come on, you got to try it.
Yeah. So it was those little things where you just, every time you read through it, I read my book in different pieces so many times. And it was just how am I still finding things? I know it's crazy.
It never ends. That's what I've accepted after doing many of these projects.
Yeah.
Is it a Picasso quote? I don't remember. I'm gonna.
It's probably Einstein, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or Adolf Hitler. I don't know.
Maybe Hitler.
But But it's that art is never finished. It's only abandoned. Basically, is the concept, and that's so true. It's so true that I really do think that you could almost do subsequent drafts indefinitely and still feel like you're making improvements. I mean, some things you might just be getting to the point where you're just making changes for the sake of making changes, and that doesn't make sense. But no, where you're legitimately finding, maybe after 10 drafts, you're no longer finding typos, but you may find, just syntactical, not blunders at that point, but inefficiencies, right? Where just words that you don't need, and you could kill that, or even entire sentences or passages, even that don't need any of that actually. And then find little chinks in your train of thought and how you were laying things out, and it didn't occur to you that you actually they're people are probably going to be wondering about this. You probably should put, you just do that almost indefinitely.
Yeah.
So there is a point where you just have to say, all right, I've suffered enough to make this good enough to put out in the world. And that's how I approach it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to approach it. And it's, again, like we've already made a few word adjustments here and there in the book already to go into the next printing cycle. And so again, it's kind of like a never ending thing where I'm constantly revisiting constantly. And I would assume like yourself, very hard on myself in terms of like, man, this could be better. This could have been better. I'm already making notes for a second edition.
I'm going through, I've done 3 official editions of Bigger, Leaner, Stronger and Thinner, Leaner, Stronger. And I've done mini editions in between. Because they're self-published books, I can update it as much as I want, which awesome. Actually has been a bit of it's a curse. It's a mixed blessing, right? But now I'm going through and I'm doing what really should be a 4th edition, but I'm because of my agreement with Simon & Schuster, I agreed that I'm not going to do any book releases leading up to their book, and then I have to wait 6 months after. So what I'll end up doing is just pushing all of it live, probably just as the 3rd edition, and going forward, people are going to get a book that is fundamentally the same, but I think it's much better. I think it's better organized. I think I'm doing a better job explaining certain concepts. I think that I am doing a better job just in my prose. I think I'm a better writer now than I was then. And I've been working on this material now essentially for 2 years, because I did the 3rd editions of those books. Then I did this Muscle for Life book, and that was a year back and forth. And that was similar material that I had to now mold for a different crowd and take stuff out and put stuff in and blah, 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 but similar material, and then roll right into these 4th edition. So I feel like maybe a photographer who's been retouching the same 10 photos for like 2 years straight, where I'm just like, I have to finish this. I've got to that. I've reached that point. It's kind of like when you've been lean bulking for like 6 months, and you're force feeding yourself every meal. You just feel gross, and you're just gutting it out. Please let me just
what am I really doing
here? Yeah. You get to that point where you just kind of lose your way. What am I doing? You start asking yourself, well, what am I doing?
Am I fighting for micrograms of protein here? Yeah, like exactly. Micrograms of muscle. It's like, is that worth it? Probably not.
Yeah. But I'm pot committed. I can't pull out now. So I'm going to get.
No, you're in.
Yeah.
You're in the deep end. Yeah, you can't.
Anyway, so let's talk about muscle growth. Let's talk about the mechanics of muscle growth, and how they work, and then maybe some practical implications in terms of programming, how to turn those into effective programming.
Absolutely. So I'll start with sort of an introductory to so we have the 3 main types of or the 3 stimuli that sort of contribute to muscle growth, right? And these are ever evolving. We've kind of landed on these 3, but it seems that these are always sort of moving around in terms of their level of importance. Some have a 2-way relationship. Some are a 1-way street. Some are a 2-way street, sort of thing, and contributing. But right, so we have the first one, which is mechanical tension, which we mentioned. Right, which we know is sort of the main driver of what sort of leads to muscle growth. Then we have muscle damage, and then we have metabolic stress. Okay, so those are going to be the 3 main stimuli that we're working with, right? So I'm going to introduce mechanical tension here for us. So basically, for muscle growth to occur, there must be a mechanical stimulus or stress that happens, right? That's the mechanical tension. So this mechanical stimulus is referred to as mechanical tension or muscular tension, right? More colloquially. And when you contract your muscles against resistance, you create mechanical tension via the force being placed on those muscles, right? So once those receptors within the muscles, right, those mechanoreceptors is what they're called, within the muscle, detect that tension, there's a cascade of chemical reactions that basically lead to muscle growth down the line, right? And that process is that process of mechanotransduction, which is basically taking physical stimulus or resistive work and making it more of the biological response or chemical response in the body that then relays the message down the chain, if you will, of command. So that's
and without getting too far into the weeds,
sure.
What is that hormonal or chemical cascade look like, just in terms of components?
Yeah, as far as that chemical cascade, I mean, you're looking at a word or a phrase that we would be familiar with is muscle protein synthesis, right? So there's that physical stimulus that turns into a chemical one that then leads down the chain of muscle protein synthesis being the response, right? And then we have to sort of have a certain threshold of stimulus to then sort of lead to that cascade,
actually
to trigger it.
Yeah.
Right? And then the amount or duration of the time that system is turned on or switched on, if you will, then we kind of get into things that are nutritional and protein based, right? Which is why protein intake and other macronutrient intake, such as carbohydrates and fats, that help fuel that process, right? So we need a certain thing to trigger it and a certain threshold to trigger it, but then, or to switch it on, if you will, kind of like a light switch.
I use the obvious metaphor in some of my writing is like muscle building machinery, basically.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
It kind of just sits there latent until it gets kickstarted into action, and then it runs until it stops for various reasons, and then again it waits for its next stimulus. And
yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. And so basically that's the machinery we're working with, right? And so there's obviously a threshold, which strength training is such a good way to trigger that, respond to that. And it's a safe and effective way to make that happen, right? And we can target tension in certain muscle groups to have that response in those muscle groups specifically, right? Which obviously, if we're looking to craft or grow a physique that we want to, or maybe improve our arms or our back or our chest, right? That we need to be able to, we can't just squeeze our entire body or just go for a run and hope that our chest grows, right? We need a stimulus on that muscle tissue, on those muscle cells, or those muscle fibers to actually make this happen, right? Especially in those specific areas, right? So there's very specific sites, right? And these all work sort of by themselves, but collectively, but also kind of in their own camps, right? You got to think of chest as completely different muscle as obviously your arms or your legs or something like that, right? In the way that this is going to function and work.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that point that I think many people listening probably are aware of, but some people may not be aware of, is in terms of volume. That you can be, so volume for people listening, you could measure that in different ways. One easy way I like to do it is, and I'll give Greg Nuckols credit for this, hard sets taken close to muscular failure. So you can do a set of bench press, and that obviously is direct volume for your chest, your pecs. That's how most people are going to think of the bench press, but that also does provide volume, certainly for your triceps, also your shoulders, at least your front deltoids, your anterior deltoids, and your biceps, maybe a little bit. I probably wouldn't, if I were going to be real nitpicky with counting my volume, I wouldn't give that a 1-to-1. And I don't get into like fractional volume and say, oh, well, that was half of a set for biceps.
No, but it may actually depend. It may actually make a decision. If you're in the weeds and in the nuance of having to make strategic decisions from an exercise selection standpoint, it may, depending on the load and intensity you're working at that bench press, obviously the biceps are going to have a role of stabilization of the shoulder and elbow joint during the bench press. So are we going to do something that is going to be heavily dependent on the biceps right after that? Maybe not, right? Because that we could have some overlap there. It's not direct volume, but it's sort of, what is that? Synergistic volume in a way.
Yeah, I just call it indirect. I know it's not a technical
indirect
term. I just try to make it simple. Like, okay, we have exactly what we're focusing on.
Good way to put it. Indirect.
But then we have these other muscles that are involved, and the reason I brought that up is helps explain why the big primary lifts, the compound lifts are so efficient, because when you do a squat, when you do a deadlift, when you do an overhead press, when you do a vertical press of any kind, you do a horizontal press, you are not just training the muscle group that maybe you feel it the most in. You're engaging a lot of other muscle groups, and you are accumulating volume in those. Even it may be indirect. And again, if you are going to be very specific with tracking your volume or planning your volume, you may not count it 1-to-1. Like you may not count even a deadlift as one set of direct volume for your biceps because of the isometric element of it. It's not going to be as effective for training your biceps as a biceps curl, but it's not nothing. And so, you are going to get between a squat and a deadlift, that you're going to get a muscle building stimulus in pretty much about most of, not your press muscles, maybe not your triceps and your pecs, but in many other, maybe not your shoulders so much, but in many other muscles in your body, you're getting a lot of muscle building bounce for the ounce, so to speak. And then you can supplement some isolation work because that if you just did your heavy pulling and your heavy rows, if you're a guy and you want to have big biceps, probably not going to be enough unless your biceps are just hyper responders, right?
That, or if you're very detrained, right? Or very new, right? And so, I mean, you could look at a photo of Harry Houdini. That dude was jacked, right? And he wasn't in there doing bicep curls. I can tell you that. Yeah. So how's that dude have feathered quads and he's jacked, right? And has delt caps and whatever else. Like, I don't think he's doing isolation curls and leg extensions. There's a certain threshold of stimulus that has to occur, right, to turn this machinery on. And then based off some genetics and stuff like that some is a little bit more responsive than others, right?
Yep. Okay, good. So that's mechanical tension. And then let's move on to muscle damage. And what is that? And also, how much do you think that contributes to? I know this is an ongoing discussion.
Yeah.
Or is it more just a byproduct of training properly, of reaching that mechanical tension, that appropriate level that promotes maximum protein synthesis without going so far that you're now beyond diminishing returns? You're actually not gaining muscle and strength faster. You are just making it harder to recover from your training.
Yeah, it's a great way to sort of introduce it. So muscle damage, basically the micro tears to the muscle fiber and disruption sort of within the functional unit of a muscle, the way that it contracts, right? So it's kind of that disruption of that machinery or physical makeup of that muscle, but also those those small micro tears that we always kind of hear about correlated with muscle damage, right? And the main role of muscle damage, or the main thing, is going to be a byproduct of muscle contraction, right? It's sort of an accumulation of waste, and there's different mechanisms here, but the main one just being sort of those micro tears, and ultimately a byproduct of this process. And there does seem to be, and especially in my opinion, this, as you mentioned, this is an ongoing debate, an ongoing discussion, and we're trying to learn more. It's pretty miraculous. I find it miraculous that as much as we know about muscle and as much as we know about the human body, we still don't know as much as we could. And there's still a lot more that we can find out, right? Which to me is exciting.
I mean, especially if we talk about other stuff like the brain.
Yeah.
It's
wild.
Yeah. And consciousness, even. What is the nature of consciousness?
Yeah.
Maybe
I read a lot of, yeah, I don't know.
In our lifetimes, I don't know. Hopefully we'll know more than we know now. I'm not sure that riddle, unless like benevolent aliens come and share the secrets of the universe. So I don't know if we'll see that resolved in our lifetime.
Yeah. And do we even, I think the question is do we even have the language capacity of intelligence to comprehend it? Right. I don't know. We're smart animals, but are we as smart as we need to be to figure it out?
True.
I don't know.
Yeah. And that also depends, of course,
time will tell.
Cultural paradigms, even like what's acceptable and what's not. Obviously, materialism is in vogue right now. Yeah. But what if consciousness isn't material in nature, and that's just taboo? Like if you have any sort of non-materialistic hypothesis, you're never going to get attention. You're never going to get published. No one's going to care. I mean, it's naive to think that politics and that just meaning the games that relate and the ideas that relate to power and status and so forth. It would be naive to think that doesn't operate in the sphere of science as well, especially with controversial things that you could say have paradigm shifting potential like this. I mean, you could imagine if there were scientifically verified breakthroughs that confirmed that, and just imagine whatever that might be, that confirmed that consciousness there is something immaterial about us, what would that do? I mean,
well, you got to, this happens in history all the time, right?
Oh, sure.
Like, if we don't update certain viewpoints because it does play with the status quo of the current understanding of something. So it's easier just to kind of like, yeah, I get it, but like, that's probably true, but it's easier if we just don't say it, because then it's going to be this whole thing and people are going to lose tenure.
Yeah.
They're going to lose,
or you just kind of memory hole
you're just
the evidence for it, the anomalies, the things that don't add up with the current orthodoxy, and you just go, there's probably a good explanation. I'll let somebody else worry about that.
And then there's just generation after generation that's just like, you know, and it's like, well, you may never get there. I don't know.
Anyway,
but to the threshold of muscle damage, you know, like we were kind of talking off air about this a little bit, and to me, it's past the point of being a product. There's sort of past the point of being a byproduct of muscle contraction, right? So that we contract the muscle, we create mechanical tension on the muscle, we create this cascade. But when we do contract, right, there are positive things that happen, but just like anything, there's negative things that occur during that process in terms of metabolic waste and waste product from that machinery working, right? So like if a machine is working in it, let's say your engine, right, it's working and it heats up, right? A byproduct of an engine running is heat, right? And so you have to have some sort of machinery to regulate heat, right? And so that's just a byproduct, that more or less making the comparison to a byproduct of a machine working, right? So a byproduct of muscle contraction is therefore damage that can occur if we have too much mechanical tension happen or too much intensity of it for too long of a duration, right? And this is where we get into the field of an adequate amount of training volume, right? We need hard sets, but how many hard sets do we need relative to our training age, relative to our training abilities, right? How much volume were we doing before then, right? Yeah. So there's some good stuff.
Our lifestyle as well.
Lifestyle is a big one. Nutritional levels, status,
sleep,
sleep, all that stuff, right? So all this is playing into this. It's not just a black and white thing. So, go ahead.
I'll just throw this question out here, and then if you wanted to continue with that thought and jump over to it, but something that I've been asked over the years is, should I be? This would be a person asking, should I be trying to optimize my training for maximum muscle damage? And you've already alluded to the answer to this, but I think it's worth mentioning, just specifically because I know that if I think back to my experience, my own fitness journey, there certainly was a time. I like to think that the meta, so to speak, of fitness is shifting, but maybe I'm just my own bubble. So I don't know exactly, but there certainly was a time when it was very much that bomb and blast. And you know, if you weren't extremely sore from your training, then you probably should have trained harder. And I know there isn't a perfect correlation between muscle soreness and muscle damage, but generally speaking, that's if you do a ton of volume in a training session and it's at least halfway close to muscular failure, you're going to get more sore than if you did half of that volume. What are your thoughts on that? Because again, what people who maybe would think that muscle damage is a major contributor to muscle building would do then is say, hey, well, I should make sure that I achieve a lot of muscle damage. Like first and foremost, damage the muscles a lot, you know?
Yeah. And this is where, any old trainer can make you sore. That's kind of where that adage came from, because I can make you sore doing a lot of
we can do
stuff.
Some heavy eccentrics. We'll just do a bunch of that.
Yeah.
You're going to be,
there's certain
sore. Things.
Yeah. Drop sets, continue, like just super long, metabolically stressful sets, things that create a lot of metabolic waste. Muscle damage is within that. They disrupt a lot of things within the cell, right? There's things that it's helpful to a degree, and then there's obviously a point at which it's not helpful anymore, right? There's a lot of, to make a metaphor to life, there's a lot of that in our everyday life. It's like a little of that would have been helpful, but this is too much, right? It's becoming unhelpful up to this point, right? And that kind of answers to your question.
One mask in the beginning, that makes two masks outside now jogging.
Like,
what are you doing?
Come on, man. So within that muscle damage, there is a point of it being too much, right? And like I was saying, off air, in our conversation was, there seems to be sort of, in my opinion, there's sort of there starts to be a benefit of muscle damage early on, maybe in a training phase or a new movement, right? So we know when things are novel and new. So if let's say we try a new movement, we haven't back squatted before, or we haven't, bench pressed before.
I safety bar squatted for the first time actually in this training cycle, just because I was never in a gym that had a safety bar.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a little bit wonky at first. I mean, I quickly got into the groove because, it's maybe feels a little bit more similar to a front squat than a back squat, or something right in the middle. But those first couple of weeks I had that, I felt a little bit new again. I was like,
yeah,
oh, wow, I have to actually pay attention to my form, and I'm like a little bit off. And
yeah, well, we're always working through different movement patterns, right? So our nervous system understands what patterns are most advantageous to getting this load from point A to point B safely and effectively, right? And there's a point at which we understand that, and there's a point at which we want to, follow along with that. And our nervous system is very smart. It's constantly learning. Each rep, it's learning. And so that's why it's good to have like good training technique, for example. So like each bad rep could be training a bad way of, a bad movement pattern that is. So
I think that's one of the benefits of just doing a few warm-up sets. I mean, there are other benefits, but even just practicing proper form with lighter weight that allows you to really pay attention to what you're doing, as opposed to those heavier working sets. And especially now you're getting down to your last couple of reps, and it can be hard to pay attention to much of anything other than just move.
Yeah, well, it's a fundamental skill, right? And I want to get into that a little bit later on after I want to finish muscle damage really, so I don't want to lose my train of thought. But within muscle damage, there seems to be that little bit, right? There's like we're talking about off air. It's sort of a proxy where it lets us know we're placing tension in the right spots, right? It lets us know that we achieved a certain threshold that we hadn't achieved before, right? And we know with progressive overload, and that's an important bit of training periodization and programming and progressing on our muscle growth journey, right? We need progressive overload. We need a progressive stimulus of some kind to further along an adaptation that we want to happen, right? Because once we adapt to a certain stress, we're pretty covered with that. Right? You get really good at running a mile. A mile is not going to be too difficult any longer. But then you take that mile and make it 2 miles. Okay, now we got some adaptation to happen, right? We have a progressive stimulus there. Same here. The same thing here with strength training, with creating tension, and with muscle damage, right? So I do think, I wouldn't shy away from maybe creating a little bit, and or if you happen to come by it, don't think of it as like, oh, my gains are gone. But think of it as too far, right? There is, and it's important to note, and I say this in the book, exercise-induced muscle damage, right, is what we're talking about specifically here, because there's also muscle damage due to trauma, right? And there's different levels of soreness, right? And there's actually, I put a continuum in the book on muscle soreness, talking about kind of where it sort of can be a positive thing and where it gets into a negative thing. And also where you should seek out professional, health professionals that are trained and qualified, like physicians and stuff, physiotherapists, if you come across too much trauma, right? Or what is beneficial. So
where is that point generally of diminishing returns for people wondering, okay, so they're thinking, how do I know then what are some of the signs that I'm doing it right, that I'm stimulating enough, I'm creating enough muscle damage to get the most out of that pathway, so to speak? Or even if it is just a byproduct, then it would be a sign that I'm creating enough tension or enough metabolic stress. How would that look?
Yeah. So as far as I kind of equate it, it's kind of a feeling thing a lot, where I separate tension-based soreness with like trauma-based soreness. Like you've gone too far, right? And so like, to me, an easy example to me is like a little tension-based soreness is like you were sitting down and you went to get up and you're like, ooh, my quads are kind of sore. You kind of stretch them out. There's some tension in there. You're like, ooh, that's kind of, I don't know if I could squat today, Too far is like your partner looks at your quads and you're like, don't even look at don't even act like you're going to touch me. Don't look at them, don't get near me because you might bump into my legs. It's like you were in a car wreck, right? It's like a trauma, right? And that can happen from strength training. It can happen from exercise-induced muscle trauma, right? It's, if you've never
if you're new, go do some German volume training and see how you feel.
Oh, you'll feel like you got in a car crash.
Yeah, go do 10 by 10 on the squat rack and then
I've never been so sore. The first time I ever, this was 2013. I was first introduced to, I was in prep. And I was first which is the worst time to see this. I was first introduced to German volume training, and I did 10 by 10 with I think 225 or a little bit more. And the next morning, I felt like I got hit by a train. And it's like I'd never trained before. It was absolutely wild. And that stuck around for 7 to 10 days, right? And that's where it really goes too far, right? Where it starts to impede your other training, or it starts to leak in and impede or work against the next training session where you're going to be training that muscle group, right? So, I think a productive level of muscle soreness can be upwards of a day, 24 to 36 hours. Sometimes depending on the intensity of the session, this, certain, if you're in a really intense high volume hypertrophy phase, right? Yeah. You're probably gonna be sore for a couple of days. Yep. That's just the way of
doing tens
in
my programming. Yeah. So I start with tens at, I guess it would be 70%, or is it 75? I'd have to look at my spreadsheet. And it's pretty hard ending at least first rep in reserve. First set reps in reserve is probably 2, maybe 3, but probably 2. Final set is probably a solid 1. And that's I still get sore from that. It's hard. And I've been doing that style of training. So again, it's beyond Bigger Than You're Stronger. I have a book for intermediate and advanced weightlifters. And so over a year, 2 years ago, probably is when I started putting it together. So I started training that way then, and I enjoy it, and I'm still making progress with it. So I just have stuck with it, but it still gets me. Those,
it's going to get you.
Yeah, those
and
10s,
I think that's all right.
Yeah,
and I don't think, right, and there's different camps here, right? Because there's sort of that minimum effective dose camp.
Who would say you don't ever want to be sore. Like,
don't ever be sore.
Just do full body training and just do like 3 sets max per muscle group per workout. And then just do that every day and you'll never be sore. I mean, can that work? Yes, it can. But is that the best way for everyone to train under any circumstances? No, because actually I don't believe there is one true way to train. Again, for everybody, all circumstances, all goals. But I'd be curious to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, same. I think obviously there's a genetic factor there. There's going to be a certain threshold of stress that you have the ability to handle, right? And some of this, like, there's a reason bodybuilders are so chill. Stress is stress. And if you have a life that's super stressful, your work is stressful, your relationship is stressful, your relationship with your parents is emotionally distressful to you, like, nothing specific there, but just in general, like if you have a lot of stress, there's not going to be much room for a training stimulus to happen there. Like there's not much more in that bar graph of like, well, I only have a little bit to give here in the training department. But if your life's pretty chill and you don't have too much stress outside of what you can really handle just fine, you can handle a lot more stress within training, in my opinion. Right. Yeah. So, and I've seen this with clients, and I'm sure you've seen this with people too. So,
I've experienced it myself.
Yeah, same.
When I was writing stress my book, levels are higher,
train it all.
I can go right into my spreadsheets where I track all my workouts, and I could show you periods where I'm like, there's just a lot going on, and I guess you could call it stress, even though. I mean, it is. There's stressors. Let's just say there are a lot of stressors. Even though I generally don't get stressed out, like I'm not prone to anxiety or any serious symptoms of stress. But what I've found, and this is an unfortunate fact of being human, right, is when it's maybe more of it feels like a quantity factor rather than a quality. It's just you stack enough stressors up, and my training stagnates, weights start feeling heavy, like training weights that, maybe in the previous mesocycle, because I note down my reps in reserve as well, just because I think it's smart to track that as you get toward the end of your muscle and strength gain journey, right? Because first you gain a few reps in reserve, and then you gain some reps, and then you can gain weight. And so I'll see that, well, shit, I did the same weight as 2 mesocycles ago, or maybe 1 mesocycle ago, but I hit my sets, but my RIR like collectively went down. You know what I mean? And instead of a 2, 2, 2, 1, it was like a 2, 1, 1, 0, 1, which I wouldn't even necessarily, you know what I mean? So I've noticed that. And also that will impact my sleep, unfortunately, where I won't have trouble falling asleep, but I will wake up several times in the night. And there's nothing I've been able to do to resolve that other than just bringing stress down. Unfortunately, I wish that weren't the case, because
we're human, we're a biological system.
It's obnoxious that because that one in particular, I would take, there are so many other negative side effects that I could experience that I would take over that one, because sleeping poorly, it just messes everything up.
Oh, it's the governor of life, right? It's your central control unit failing, right? In a very crucial situation. And it's, without that, you're kind of lost, right? But right. There's a productive amount of it. And then again, like, I don't believe, I'm not necessarily on the side of, I'm Switzerland in all equations. I always say that, like, I'm just in the middle. I'm here to just make the best of what we have. And I don't really live in any extreme. And so I don't think, to kind of expand on that, the minimum effective dose thing, I think if you're really, really new, let's say you're middle age or older, and you're not really looking to, like, because I don't believe strength training's sole purpose is to gain as much muscle as possible either, right? So there's a lot of benefits that extend beyond muscle growth here, right? It's just a helpful byproduct of strength training, right? We get bigger, stronger, we adapt, and sometimes leaner. And there you go. Nice. But also, I don't think that we should go for just bludgeon ourselves with trauma, either physical trauma, every training session, right? Where you can yell at me that Arnold did it till you're blue in the face, but you're not Arnold, dude. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not Michael Phelps. I can swim, but I'm not Michael Phelps, right? Like, you're not Arnold, that person.
Remember, I'm sure you did this. You remember trying his workouts from his encyclopedia?
Oh, miserable. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, I don't remember how many tiers there were. There were at least 2, if not 3. But even the first tier destroyed me. I was like,
I'm just like, I'm done.
I can't do this. I can't.
No,
it's not possible.
I'm done. Yeah, you're done after that. So there's obviously that stress factor that plays into all of it. So, and this is where kind of deloads come in, right? You hear about deloads and pulling back on training volume and training stress, and you got to periodize things, right? There's times in your life where you got to pull back on things, maybe go on vacation or holiday, spend more time with your family, and kind of take a load off, kind of recharge yourself. Same thing goes with training. It's a ebb and flow of a biological system, and it's the same thing. We're not machines, whether you speak in ones and zeros or not, right?
Totally. If you like what I'm doing here on the podcast and elsewhere, definitely check out my sports nutrition company, Legion, which, thanks to the support of many people like you, is the leading brand of all natural sports supplements in the world. Yeah, deloading is something I've become more disciplined about as time has gone on, because there was a time when I would deload because I would get sick or or maybe there would be a vacation or something. I'd always put it off.
Yeah. You're like, I'm going out of town.
I think I'm fine. I'll do another week. Yeah. Or maybe try to like selectively deload because I still want to do my deadlifts and stuff. All right, I'll do like less of this other stuff. But I've now, and this is in the program that in Beyond Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, we are deloading every 4th week. And that may sound too frequent for some people, but I have decent genetics for this kind of stuff. I have apparently good DNA for recovery. Like there's, I took one of those tests and there was one in particular, one expression of a gene that was associated with, again, very good recovery. Like apparently they see it in a lot of athletes. Right. And I've been able to do pretty well in my training, but that 4th every fourth week deloading, given the volume and the intensity of the program, which is not crazy, but you're doing probably about 15 hard sets per major muscle group per week. That would include indirect volume, and which I think, I don't know if you really can go much beyond that unless you're like a super freak and you're 19 years old and you're just invincible, period. Yeah. But for anybody listening, like I challenge anybody to try to do 20 hard sets. You go into Excel and you lay that out. You can count the indirect volume where it makes sense. 20 hard sets per major muscle group per week, and even be in a calorie surplus. If you're not a freak at 20 years old, let's see how long it lasts for. Not very long. And so the training is fairly difficult. And I tried different deload periods. I tried every 6th week. I didn't even try 8 because I know that would have been too much, but every 4th week has worked very well for me. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback from people who have read the book and are now who are doing the program, who basically have the same story as me. They're like, I never really cared that much about deloads. I was bad about it, basically. Yeah. And now I've come to really appreciate it because I come into that 4th week, 3 weeks of hard training, and I feel like, maybe I could go a bit further, but by easing up, I just then feel fully recharged, and I have another really good productive 3 weeks of training. And so anybody listening, if you're not deloading, let's say it could be 4 to 8, maybe 10 weeks if you're new, depending on what you're doing, I would recommend to do it. And if you want to learn, I'll just tell people, go over to legionathletics.com, search for deload, and you'll find an article. I think I also did a podcast if you want to just get a quick rundown of how to put it together. It's not complicated, but it can make a big difference.
Yeah. And I think the more advanced you are, right, the more frequent you have to.
Right? Because the weights are heavier. You're doing more volume.
You're creating more tension, right? Like that's the thing with where technique fits in, and where the ability to create mechanical tension fits in is, the more tension you're producing in a specific muscle, the more stress on that overall system, right? But the more work is being done in less time with less volume, right? And if we have less volume, we have less accumulated stress on the system and on our joints and our connective tissues. Yeah. And so that's a good positive thing, right? So to my goal, I kind of almost, with clients I've worked with for a long time, if we get upwards of, let's say, 16 plus sets a week on something, it's my goal, or let's say upwards of 20. It's my goal to actually be able to productively pull back on that, because that means that we have more high quality work rather than more low quality work, right? Yeah. I'd rather have high quality than quality over quantity, right? And this really plays into that in a big way. So, technique and your ability to create tension, to me, is a fundamental skill, right? It's as important to strength training as dribbling is to basketball, in my opinion. So you got to take it with, seriousness, and it's a foundational, fundamental skill. It's the sole thing we're doing in the gym. You don't go in and do anything else other than lift weight, right? You're lifting weight. Your technique matters. You're trying to create tension. You're trying to grow muscles, trying to produce an internal response, right? That we talked about earlier. So there's definitely those factors as well you got to pay attention to. But that can undulate things over the course of your career, and that's where resources like your book, my book, having a coach or a trainer, it definitely comes into play, because you can have that relationship where you're like, oh, okay, I've always heard about this. I never kind of put it into practice, right? I never saw it happening, but this makes a lot more sense. And you learn by doing, essentially.
Let's move on to metabolic stress, or metabolic fatigue. It's also referred to as that as well.
Yeah. So metabolic stress is the accumulation of metabolic products within the muscle fiber, right? Within the muscle cell during training, right? So that fatigue, right? This is where muscle or metabolic stress gets really interesting. So metabolic stress actually has, currently what we know, or is theorized, has an indirect, right? So earlier we talked about direct volume and indirect volume, right? So metabolic stress has this indirect relationship with muscle hypertrophy, right? And it does so through increasing the most direct one, which is mechanical tension, right? So I'm going to explain that. Okay, so the fatigue that is in part caused by metabolic stress is thought to contribute to an increase in mechanical tension, right? As it increases in the muscle, metabolic stress, as it increases in the muscle, it increases motor unit recruitment and decreases the muscle fiber shortening velocity, right? So it allows us to create even more tension as that fatigue is produced. And the more is produced, the more tension is produced, right? And so that's when your reps start to slow. More tension is then required to keep
to do that, to keep doing the exercise properly.
Right. And that's where your rep speed starts to really slow. You're to that point where if you're watching, like you're doing a bicep curl and you're like shaking, right? You're like, there's so much tension and there's not a lot there, right? You're getting, and that's again, so there's a healthy amount of that, right? And so we need a certain threshold of that. That's why, this is kind of where you play into the camp of muscle pumps, right? So the combination of changes in the muscle during this accumulation of fatigue basically increases the number of muscles controlled by those higher threshold motor units, right? Those motor units within your nervous system that basically are the controls, the command center to those saying like, hey, fire, 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 right? And they have their arms sort of reached out with their fingers on each one of those, sort of playing them like a piano, right? It's like fire, fire, in a different sequence or a firing rate, if you will, right? And it creates an increase in mechanical tension within the muscle. And it's very, very interesting that this can have such an indirect contribution that plays in essentially to the direct one, right? That's where that two-way street comes into play, which is very, very interesting, right? And so it kind of gets you into a few different conversations of like, okay, well, we know we want to create tension. We know we want to create it for a certain magnitude, so at a certain threshold for a certain duration of time. So that's a certain amount of volume, right? And now we can start to play with a few other factors within program design, right? Which I don't know if we'll have time to get into today, but that's where things get a bit interesting and where, all of that starts to come into play and starts to really contribute maybe to your long-term potential of muscle growth down the line.
And what are your thoughts then? Again, I can hear people wondering about styles of training that emphasize the metabolic stress. So if you poke around on Instagram, probably should delete your Instagram, but you're not going to delete it.
If
and
you're
on it. And you see people talking about finishers or just, it's generally very high rep. It's going to be 20 rep would probably be on the low end, 20 to 30 plus rep training. I often get asked about that. Like, should I be doing that? Or is that just not a very effective way to train? Because that on the strength and kind of endurance continuum, that's way over here on the muscle endurance side of things. What are your thoughts on that?
So you're getting a little bit into Dr. Cody Hahn and colleagues definitely posted a great paper on this, talking about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, right? So outside of that muscle cell, within the outside of the muscle cell directly, we have the sarcolemma and we have the sarcoplasm, and there's certain things in there, right? We store glycogen in there. There's certain enzymes in there that help sort of govern that cell in a positive way that help, maybe drive more nutrients in or more fluid or more glycogen could be stored there because we need more availability of ready to go energy within that cell, right? Because we're always working at that capacity. And so there is definitely merit to that in terms of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And so in my opinion,
opposed to making the muscle fibers just bigger, right?
Bigger, right? So there's a great visual in my book talking about or kind of going through this, right? And so if I'm able to pull this up really quick, it's a great visual where we're basically going through, right, a rise in volume of the sarcoplasm, right? So it's that includes things, mitochondria, sarcoplasmic reticulum, the things that govern calcium within the cell, which help muscles contract.
You could, I don't know if it's the technical term, but maybe you could say they're kind of fluid components.
Yeah, fluid components of the cell, right? So things are kind of floating around in there.
Yeah. And if you expand that, of course, you now have a bigger muscle, but that's different than the muscle fibers themselves and the muscle cells themselves. Like you have the cells, right? And then you have the bundles, and like those actually physically getting bigger.
And those are that's actual protein, right? Yep. Those are protein bundles. And so there's, myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is more of like the hypertrophy we're used to, where muscles, the actual protein, we're gaining more protein.
Yep.
Right next to each other, right, and in parallel and in series. So like next to each other, they're expanding. We're getting bigger. We're growing more protein, right? That muscle protein synthesis process, right? We're growing more. Synthesis just means more, right? Growing, developing. So within that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, we're basically rising the volume of that fluid state, where those things that help contribute as well to fueling the process of all that muscle growth, that myofibrillar muscle growth as well, right? So we need those components outside of that protein to do their job as well, right? Those muscle fibers to do their job as well. And really, if you think about it logically, the more we have of those, right, the more, right, if we're building a building, right, the more construction workers we have on our crew, the more optimally and more efficiently we could build a building, maybe even better and stronger in the future, right? And to me, that's kind of what you're doing, is you're kind of adding workers to your crew. You're adding more ability to divide labor and increase your ability to handle, fatigue or even work being done within workouts, within mesocycles and phases and different things, right? And so to me, it's a very useful thing. But understand too that you need, your whole workout can't just be finishers, right? So you're going to notice too, you're going to know, like, if you're
and that's
training,
the mistake that I see when people reach out to me, is like a lot of their training is that very high rep metabolic focused stuff,
right? And so you're going to notice
they do very little heavier myofibrillar focused strength training.
Yeah, so they're basically. So let's see if I can put this in a helpful way. Hopefully, my earlier explanations were helpful, and I didn't butcher them too much. But basically, that sort of training, think of it as not adding as many. You're going to add some protein, but we're not focused on adding protein there as much as we're adding the other components, right? Yeah. The more fluid-based components.
I guess you could think of it as that would make the protein components be able to work even better.
Right. They're going to work better and grow more in the future if we're doing that rather than just focusing on the fluid component. And you're going to notice people, if you've ever done finisher-based training as your sole training, or like pump style training as your sole training. That's how I used to. But how quickly, this is a test right here. How quickly did you deflate?
Yep. I used to talk about that as
you just like, I'm flat that's an instantly. Experience. I haven't trained in 2 days.
And how demotivating was that? Yeah. It was so discouraging. And I didn't know why,
Yeah.
I look in the gym, I look like, maybe not jacked, but I definitely look like I lift. And then I almost look like I don't even lift 3 days later.
Yeah. And it's different. It's a difference between, like, you've seen guys and this is where the difference of, like, I think, so like, I come from the competing world, and on stage, people talk a lot about muscle density and muscle maturity. And to me, that's just the difference of you having actual more protein, more myofibrillar hypertrophy over the course of your career, rather than sarcoplasmic based hypertrophy, right? So, us young bucks on stage are just kind of pumped up blobs of fluid, of just like, we got some muscle, but it's mainly just for show here. And as soon as we step off stage, like, we're going to flatten out. Yeah. We have about 30 minutes of where we're going to look like that older dude. But you see those guys, and that's to me, that's kind of what that is representing, is like the muscle maturity and muscle density really is displaying through just more pure protein in the muscle, more protein, the components within that muscle, right? So making up 60 to 70% of protein in the muscle itself, right, is that myofibrillar component. So that's very, very important to note, and your training should then reflect that more so than. So I do think finishers.
And that was a turning point in my own training. Yeah, that was probably one of the key things. There were a few key things, but that was one of them. Was to start lifting heavier weights. It didn't have to be. I mean, when I first started to educate myself, it wasn't powerlifting per se. I did a little bit of that, and I was like, yeah, I actually prefer more strength training with some bodybuilding stuff. But it was doing, I mean, it might have been, I can't say that I hadn't done a set of like 5s or 6s with appropriately heavy weight on a hard exercise before, but that certainly was not how I normally trained. And so by switching over to like, it was probably, I mean, I would think previously, I'm looking back, I probably never did fewer than 8 to 10 reps. And that was probably my final set. And so I was probably starting 15, 20, and to switch from that to like warm up and go into 5s was a big game changer for me, and just in terms of actually getting strong for the first time, and then really starting to gain noticeable muscle mass that didn't just disappear 1 or 2 days later.
And so there is merit too, though, to have more sarcoplasmic based type of training in certain phases where, right. So if you notice you're lacking in a certain part of your training, right? Like, let's say your volume tolerance is lower than you think it should be, right? You may be lacking some things from a machinery standpoint in the cell, right? And this is mainly theory based, right? But if we think about it logically, you may be, it's not a far out reach that it's like, so, we've been training this one way for so long. Let's say we're, in the low rep camp where we're really focused on creating a lot of tension, a high amount of intensity in our, we never go above 10 reps. If we go over 8 or 6, right? Within that, right, there's a lot of adaptation that's left out there to basically fend for itself that isn't being properly managed or given its due diligence to then grow, right? And we need all of this stuff to work really well. And the better we can have it work really well, the better off we are, right? And so I think a prime example is this: if you watch, you have some of the world's strongest people, right, in powerlifting and strongmen, make them do anything over 6 reps, and it's their world's going to end, right? Like, we have metabolic fatigue coming up out of nowhere after 6 reps. You're like, you could do 25 and just be fine. Like your machinery, your ability to clear lactate.
Yeah, you put that into a rep max calculator. You're like, what is going on?
Yeah, it's like, there's a certain rate limiter of our future gains that's sort of being compromised by our lack of ability to see the full picture, rather than this myopic view of it, of just this one sole focus of being like myofibrillar hypertrophy. Like, it has to be within this, right? So if you never do those types of training, you never expose yourself to those things, and you never have to force those things to adapt to work better and more efficiently, and your ability to store maybe more muscle glycogen in a cell, like, that's huge for your long-term potential of muscle growth. It allows you over a course of a phase maybe to tolerate more volume, you recover a bit quicker in between sessions, which, as we've been talking about this whole time, that's massively helpful in a phase where you're trying to build muscle, right? So that isn't to say that, yes, myofibrillar hypertrophy is important. Building more protein in your muscle is important, but so are other things, right? So are more aerobic adaptations, right? Making sure that you can, you're a healthy individual, that, muscle building and muscle protein synthesis and muscle building is an expensive process for your body to do, right? And if it doesn't have to do it, it's not probably going to do it, So it's one of those things where we got to sort of set ourselves up for success and be sure the whole picture is taken care of, the whole cell is happy, and we're the right machinery, and all the machinery rather, is being given its time, rather than just sole focusing on one aspect of many, right? Within a long-term approach to trying to grow muscle.
That's makes me think of my position on cardio, which has evolved from the first edition of Bigger, Leaner, Stronger. I was like, just do as much cardio as you need for your body composition goals. And if that's none, that's fine. Basically, like, if you don't want to get that lean, you probably don't need to do any cardio. You could just lift, watch your calories and macros, and be done with it. Now, I don't think that's wrong, but now I do recommend that people try to work in some cardio for health reasons. There are some additional benefits. Like you do get a lot of health benefits from strength training, obviously, but there are some particularly cardiovascular benefits and some telomere, like longevity related stuff that you probably don't get from strength training nearly as much as you get from cardio. But there's also a performance component, and this is not news to you, but it's something I maybe a year ago or so is when I was reading about it, and then I started doing more cardio, and I noticed it is as my cardiovascular fitness has improved, my ability to recover in between my weightlifting, my strength training sets has improved. And by that, I mean, I feel like, so my heart rate comes down faster. And I feel like I have a bit more energy. So most people listening probably, they probably rest. They probably have a stopwatch. Like, so I use a little stopwatch app on my phone, and I watch my rest times fairly closely. Like I'm probably 2.5 minutes or so in between isolation exercises, maybe 2 to 2.5, and then 3 to 3.5 in between my sets of the bigger, heavier lifts. And I rarely go beyond that. And so those rest times are appropriate, obviously. But if I do a set of 10s on deadlifts, the hardest shit, so hard.
Yeah.
And is 3.5 minutes, is that enough to, if I were to rest another minute, would I do better? Yeah, I would actually. But I don't want to be in the gym too long. And so I know that's appropriate. I'm not like resting 1 minute and, going to blow myself up. However, when I give myself that 3.5 minute rest time, give or take, I have noticed a difference where I would do cardio 2 days a week previously, 30 minutes, just set steady state, just moderate intensity, nothing special. And then I moved to 6 to 7 days a week, same thing, 30 minutes, but I've been able to increase my intensity. Like what would get me pretty winded previously does not now. And so as my cardiovascular fitness has improved, I've noticed in my lifting, especially on these big lifts that are hard, the squat, the deadlift, the higher rep stuff that really gets my heart going, that in that 3.5 minutes, my heart rate has come down more than it has previously. And I do feel readier to do that next set. And that translates into better performance.
Yeah. And your ability to utilize oxygen's improved, right? And how big of a factor is oxygen within every biological system in your body, right? We have anaerobic systems, which can work without oxygen, and we have aerobic systems that we can work, that have to have oxygen to work. And our anaerobic systems are very short-lived, right? We know that, our creatine phosphate system is within like what we know of now is, at least I know of, is like around 10 seconds, right? So you're 10 to 15 maybe, right? And then you're cracking into other things that need oxygen to work, right? And so there are things we can do with and without. And the more oxygen you have and the more efficient you are at utilizing it, the better off you're going to be, not only within your training, but within your recovery process, which is aerobic, right? Recovery is an aerobic process. So you need it, and you need it for your health. As I think this is a very important thing to mention, as cardiovascular disease is one of the top killers of people on this planet, I think it's paramount that we, as health professionals, stress the importance of improving health as well as the other benefits of strength training. And cardio, in my opinion, and aerobic-based training, I think should have a place in there. And I'm really happy to hear you kind of have changed your tune on that a little bit, not to benefit me, but just for the sake of like, because you do reach so many people, that I think it's an important message to send out of like, hey, better health. Yeah, maybe in your 20s and 30s, you're good to go without, but like, understand that health degrades over time, or things get a little less efficient. Our ability to utilize oxygen, risk for cardiovascular events and disease creep up later in life. And it's good to sort of create these long-lasting habits now and sort of preemptively attend to those things rather than just wait until, we don't want to wait until we're 50 to start doing cardio, right? We want to do it, and
you can think of it as a health debt, so to speak, or fitness debt.
Yeah.
Like if you accumulate too much, like, yes, you can dig out, but it might be a tough row to hoe. It might be a long process, and certainly, again, you can do it, but a little bit of prevention is going to be, future you is going to thank you a lot for taking and again, for me, it's 30 minutes, 6 or 7 days a week. And I always do something else. So I have an upright bike down in my basement. And if I have work calls, I'll usually save them so I have to sit on the phone anyway.
You may as well do something.
I might as well do something, right? Yeah. And again, my intensity is it's at a level of, again, I'd say like a 4 or 5 out of 10. And so that means that I can have a conversation. I'm a little bit winded. And so I'll tell people, like, I'm on a bike, just so you know. I'm not just like
else.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Or just randomly out of breath. Yeah. Isn't this guy supposed to be like a health dude? He can't even breathe.
Sorry, I walked up my stairs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, I went and I got a soda and sat down. But it's not so much like, if I were doing higher intensity stuff, I wouldn't even be able to concentrate, right? Because that'd blow me up.
Yeah.
But so now I just multitask it, and if I don't have a call, then I spend that time listening to something that I want to listen to. It could be a podcast, an interview, or I'll just spend my time reading. So I read on my phone as it is. So again, because it's not too distracting, it's a little bit obnoxious, but it's not too bad. I can still read and get some more pages done in the day. And so for me, it's
a win-win,
a 360-degree win, right?
Yeah, it's a win. It's a win-win. And to me, like, the way that I think about it, I try to put things in simple terms, and I try to create a perspective around things that sort of just lends its own hand, right? That sort of speaks for itself. And to me, let's say better aerobic train. I'm not an aerobic athlete. I'm obviously here. I wrote a book on science of strength training about building muscle, right? I'm a proponent for this stuff, right? I'm not just working against it, but I'm talking about the importance. That should tell you the importance of how I view your health and just the longevity of life, and the quality of that life over a lifespan. But, better aerobic fitness is going to lead to a lower resting heart rate, right? If we can cut our heart rate by 10 beats a minute over the course, if we can cut down our resting heart rate,
especially if it goes
by 10, like,
let's say it goes more. I mean, there are a lot
more.
of people I've heard.
How many?
They go, I was at like 70 probably on
now you're
average.
At 50,
Yeah. And now I'm at 50, and I have my little tracker, and it's some, in the middle of the night, it even goes into the 40s.
Yeah. And extrapolate that across a lifetime. How many beats did you save your heart over the course of a lifespan, over the course of 10 years? Right. And that cannot be a negative thing. Yeah. Cannot. Right. Everything that makes sense to anything, right? That can't be a negative thing, right? That can only be positive, outside of it going too low. And then you're like, oh God, we have other problems. But then we're not looking at your overall health or your overall fitness levels as much as like, or how jacked you are versus like, this dude, we got to keep this dude alive. But
you're not going to get there.
No.
It's not like, oh, you got too cardiovascularly fit. Now you are dangerously low.
Yeah. You're not like Rob Lowe in Parks and Rec, right? You're
I don't watch the show, so I don't.
Okay. Well, he's such a good role for him. Like, he's this fitness freak that basically has like the resting heart rate of 36, and he runs it, he's going to run everywhere. He works for the government, but if he's got to run across town, he's like, okay, he's got to set his, he's got to beat his mile time to the next meeting.
Yeah.
He's just the embodiment of, it's a perfect role for Rob Lowe, but he's the epitome of health in that show, essentially.
Nice. Well, I had a couple other things on the agenda, but I think we should save them maybe for a follow-up interview, because
I'd love to do that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So why don't we just wrap this up here? This was a lot of great information. Perfect. And again, let's tell people about the book. If people, obviously you can show it again for YouTube, but people listening, like the title of it and where they can get it, and then anything else where they can find you on social media if you're active there, or anything else you want them to know about. Absolutely.
So the book, Science of Strength Training, I was trying to pull up the price here for you because it's a good selling point. So Science of Strength Training, if you're watching, this is it. Science of Strength Training. If you're not watching, it is a beautifully designed book. It's got a yellow cover. It's got like a CGI anatomy illustration on the front.
Really well done, by the way, I'll add. I was impressed with it. I
thank you.
do get manuscripts sent to me fairly often, and they're okay. Some, I'm not to put them down generally, but this one stood out to me. I was like, oh, I appreciate the work that went into this. There's a lot.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
A lot of good information in here. It reminds me of a bit of how do you pronounce his name? Frederick
Delavier.
I know how to spell it. I guess Delavier or
Delavier. I don't know. But so where this book really, the goal of it, where it fits in, was somewhere between the Strength Training Anatomy is the book we're talking about. Yep. If you guys have heard of it, I'm assuming he's French, right?
He's not American, but yeah, that's
not American. Yeah. Okay, we know that.
But it could be. He could be Swiss. He could be.
No, it's true. I'm so sorry. I don't want to offend anybody, especially him. But this book, my book, it was kind of the goal of like, how do we take the usefulness and practicality of strength training anatomy that has lended its hand to this industry for so long, and it is such a popular book. How can we add that and blend that with other great books like Muscle and Strength Pyramids from Helms and Andy Morgan and Andrea Valdez, and even some of the practicality and usefulness from your books, right? When it comes to like program design and fatigue management and all of these things, right? And how do I package that up in a way where it's written for the everyday person, right? It's written for the 99% of people that need to read it. And I've gotten a ton of messages from everyone from your everyday person, your mom with 3 kids, to your dad, to your early on personal trainer, or a personal trainer that's into their fitness journey or into their personal training job, but they didn't necessarily get a formal education in exercise science. So it's like, hey, this is a great resource for you. It's $15.99. Like, that's the best part to me.
Which, with where the CPI is headed, I don't know, that's like a gallon of milk now.
Yeah. So between a gallon of milk or a pound of beef, you're looking at a book. A steak, a New York strip steak at Whole Foods is more expensive than that. Than this book. Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully if you use this book, you can learn enough to buy multiple steaks, right? Is the goal. But no, so that's honestly one of the coolest parts for me, is the fact that it's $15.99. It's an under $20 book, that is. And I just think that's magical, because I wanted to basically break down the entry point to this information, right? Because it's hard to come by. It's hard to put all together. It's hard to wrap up in a pretty picture. And again, I'm so grateful that I was able to have the opportunity to even write a book that could fill a gap in a space that it's sort of lost on me still. That's like, why am I the one that wrote this?
Why not?
Why not? I'm grateful for it.
When I published Bigger, Leaner, Stronger initially, I was like, why does this not already exist? Why is a lot of it so much just hype and, marketing sizzle? And why not just give very simple instructions, give a bit of the scientific background? And yes, the stuff that works, the 20% that gives you 80% is kind of boring. It is. It's not very sexy. It doesn't have the marketing appeal that so many other things out there have that are contrived. And that is one way of going about it, right? Where you're like, not really about results and science and truth. You're just saying, okay, what's going to hook people, right? Like those conversations with publishers are, what's the hook? What's the new, what's the breakthrough? Is it, is it the lectins like Gundry? Is
that's it.
Yeah.
Eat eggs.
Or is it even the paleo pitch? Great marketing, pseudoscience, mythological fake history, but you combine what appears to be scientific information and historical information. Yeah, that makes for a very persuasive package. But when I went about Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, and even now after many revisions, and I'm still updating it, I've I think stayed true to that original vision, which is I think I have improved a bit of the persuasive appeal of it, but not at the expense of the actual information. So
Yeah.
very much like in just your book as well, these are not books for people. Like if you are still in the beginning of, let's say, your journey as a consumer, right? So you're not stupid, but you're not a sophisticated consumer in this space yet. And you still are looking for the miracle fixes and the one true diets or the one true way of doing things and the one weird trick and all that stuff, right?
The hack.
And I understand. I do understand. I mean, you can have actually intelligent people who they read, okay, all I have to do is like stop eating these few random foods and I'll take these supplements. And you're saying I can lose 20 pounds in 30 days, even if they're like, sounds too good to be true. But who cares? I'll try it. I'll try it for a month and I'll spend $60 on this supplement and see what happens.
Right.
And so many people, they do need to go through that experience at least once to realize like, okay, that didn't do anything. And now they've kind of upgraded in terms of sophistication. And so now they start looking away from that stuff to stuff like our stuff, which again, it's incumbent upon us to market ourselves and our work well. We can't just blame people for being so dumb that they don't go and buy our poorly titled, poorly written, poorly designed, ugly stuff. Like that's not how it works, right? So we need to be good marketers. But again, that core message of there isn't a lot of sex appeal in a lot of the stuff that certainly we're talking about here. But here's the thing. It gets you sexy though. It works.
Yeah, it works.
So that's kind of sexy actually.
Yeah.
And so it's just, people, they need to find their way. And I understand. And that's one of the reasons why I continue to write blog articles and record podcasts and just trying to get people out again of that, cesspool and into the Olympic swimming pool.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start swimming some laps, right? Good freestyle stroke. Exactly, man. You said it well. And again, like these may not be your first books. If they are your first books, if our books are your first books, we're going to celebrate that. If they're not, we're not here to bash you or condemn you or to be condescending. We're just here to sort of say, what's up? Thanks so much for joining us. And we're here if you have questions, right? It's that is where we're coming from. And so, that's such a big part of the book. It goes over, again, as we talked about today, it goes over mechanisms of muscle growth. It dives into anatomy. It dives into muscle function. There's an overview of each muscle in chapter 2 before we get into the exercise portions of each muscle group. Chapter 3 is all about injury prevention, working back up from an injury, warm-ups, what's the new latest science or making sense of static stretching. I go into that, kind of making sense of that. And then program design, that's a big question, are there programs in it? Will I learn how to create my own programs? And the answer is yes. Chapter 4 is everything I could put together with the limited pages I had left in the book to basically make the best section on program design that I could. Everything from volume to fatigue management to exercise selection to progressions to there's an example of different program types. So if your goal is to build muscle, there's a 3 and 4 and a 5-day beginner and advanced program in there. To gain strength, same thing. To maybe improve, metabolic conditioning or muscle endurance or strength endurance. There's a program in there for that 3, 4, 5-day beginner and advanced, right? So there's everything you can imagine wrapped up in this under $20 book. And so I'm stoked, man. Honestly, it's sort of, I'm in disbelief. Honestly, that it's out there. I got to write it. It's having such a positive impact. It's sort of still lost on me, as you said, like when you first wrote Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, it's like, why me? Like, I don't get it, but maybe it takes, guys like us who are not at the top, but who are enough in the middle where it's like,
I mean, I wasn't even at the bottom. I was, I had no connections in the industry. It was,
you were more or less still Sean Patrick, right? You were still,
exactly. Yeah. That's my pen name for my random stuff. Like, speaking of that, it's probably not anymore, but for a stretch there, after the Capitol shenanigans, that I have a Bill of Rights book for people listening, and I published it under a pen name because it'd be very random. I was like, this needs to be separate.
They're like, this is the same guy.
Yeah. He's bigger, leader, stronger, shredded chef, workout, motivation.
Know your Bill of Rights.
Know your Bill of Rights. Like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And so that was my best-selling book for months, actually.
That's
that
crazy.
was like thousands and thousands of copies a month, just because of what happened, and that spiked a lot of interest in, I suppose, our Constitution, our constitutional rights, and
there's a lot of conversation around it.
Yeah. But anyway, congratulations on the book.
You.
Great job on it. I appreciate the work that went into it. I know what that's like. And so again, if you want to just give people the title for them to go check it out.
I'll do the Instagram thing. Yeah. Science of Strength Training. Again, so Science of Strength Training. You can look up on Amazon. It's the easiest place to find it. It's at Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. It's basically everywhere books are sold, which is a benefit of the publisher, I guess. Not necessarily my doing there, but they got it out there. So I'm very grateful for that. So again, you can find it on Amazon or really wherever books are sold. And then I do hang out on Instagram. So if you guys want to come have a conversation, ask a question, say hello, you can find me on Instagram. And that's at Austin Current. You can type in AUSTIN. You can type in Austin. It's the guy with the big beard. Actually, just me and Mike are talking here, and actually just chopped most of it off yesterday. It used to be like long. So I'm going on vacation here, and I wanted to chop it off, but
why?
Be a little, just a little cooler, Okay. My face lost weight, it's a little more agile, No,
I can't grow anything worthwhile.
Yeah,
so
it grows super fast.
I haven't tried, and it comes in kind of. There's a point where I'm just like, this doesn't work. Also, I have like a fat face naturally, and I guess maybe if I got enough hair on it, it would. But there's this awkward.
There's a threshold.
Where my face looks even fatter, and I don't really care.
As soon as it starts going outward, it's like no, you got to go. Yeah, there's a certain.
And then you have to take care of it, and I'm not a
there's a maintenance to it for sure. You're a handsome dude, you don't need it. I'm more or less covering mine up, but so yeah, that's me on Instagram at Austin Current. And then the book actually has an Instagram if you guys want to check it out, or before you buy the book, you want to what's in the book, what's it more about. You can go to at Science of Strength Training on Instagram, and basically get a lowdown of more information on the book. I'm actually teaching on that page. It's more of an educational platform than a sales one. Obviously, it's there to drive sales, get people interested in the book, but it's more of an educational thing, creative project for me. So at Science of Strength Training are the two places you can find us. And our coaching company is Physique Development. So that's at Physique Development on Instagram, or physiquedevelopment.com is the coaching company.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity, man.
Well, I hope you liked this episode. I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, subscribe to the show, because it makes sure that you don't miss new episodes. And it also helps me because it increases the rankings of the show a little bit, which of course then makes it a little bit more easily found by other people who may like it just as much as you. And if you didn't like something about this episode or about the show in general, or if you have ideas or suggestions or just feedback to share, shoot me an email, mike@muscleforlife.com, muscleforlife.com, and let me know what I could do better, or just what your thoughts are about maybe what you'd like to see me do in the future. I read everything myself. I'm always looking for new ideas and constructive feedback. So thanks again for listening to this episode, and I hope to hear from you soon.